There were male actors I was once very close to, almost like only we understood each other, but then they turned their backs, leaving me in loneliness and secrets I could never speak aloud.
In October 2004, the Los Angeles Times shocked the public when it revealed a diary believed to belong to Gary Cooper. Inside, instead of recollections about his career or the glamour of cinema, was a list of 7 men with whom he had once shared secret romantic relationships. And, in the end, each of them had earned his utter contempt down to the marrow of his bones. Cooper had written, "Some kill you with a gun, some with silence. But those men, they used love to squeeze the breath out of me." So, who exactly were the men who left Gary Cooper with a lifelong hatred? And to what extent had they destroyed him with such a merciless form of love? The answers would soon be revealed. Gary Cooper, the man whose calm demeanor was unmatched on the silver screen, once celebrated as the embodiment of the ideal America, was one of the greatest icons of 20th century Hollywood. His contemplative gaze, measured voice, and utterly distinctive presence made audiences around the world believe that here was the most trustworthy man ever to appear in film. From the outside, his marriage to Veronica Balfe in 1933 seemed like a perfectly orchestrated dream. America's #1 leading man marrying a high-born New York socialite, with a lavish ceremony at St. Bartholomew's Church, gracing the cover of Life magazine alongside glowing praise, Hollywood's ideal model of marriage. Yet years later, leaked documents from the Balfe family's lawyer revealed the truth. This was, in fact, a negotiated marriage, a union where image, trust, and power were tightly intertwined. At the time, Cooper was facing whispered rumors about his sexuality and needed the perfect shield. Veronica, intelligent and of impeccable lineage, agreed in exchange for the assurance of lifelong financial security. Only 6 months after the wedding, according to records from Lloyd's of London Insurance Office, Cooper was discovered spending the night at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel with a male Broadway dancer. Veronica found out, but chose not to confront him. She quietly kept the receipts, documented everything meticulously, and from that point on lived in a marriage where the two existed merely as parallel shadows. By 1949, Cooper openly carried on an affair with actress Patricia Neal, while still secretly seeing at least 2 other male actors, according to testimony from former private investigator Fred Otash. The press remained silent at the time, but within Hollywood's inner circles, whispers began that marriage was never real. Perhaps it was precisely because his private life was filled with so much pretense that Cooper felt compelled to write everything down. Words he had never spoken aloud, loves that could never be named. And among those names was a man who had once sworn to love him forever, but was also the first to turn his back, deny him, and push him into the abyss of media scandal. Anthony Perkins. 1. Anthony Perkins, The Execution by Love. Anthony Perkins once shared on KABC TV that he grew up watching Gary Cooper on the big screen. However, few people knew that from the very first time they met during the screening of Fear Strikes Out. In November 1957 at Westwood Village, Anthony's gaze toward Gary was far from that of an ordinary fan. It was more like the reverent look of a believer encountering a living saint, yet one who was ready to pull that saint down from his throne. The first letters Anthony sent to Gary still carried an innocent and naive tone. "If one day I no longer hear applause, would you still call my name?" But according to Walter E. Ohms, Cooper's personal assistant, only a few months later, the young man had become a frequent visitor to a discreet apartment in Santa Monica. This was a place where Gary escaped the media spotlight to cook breakfast, read books, and love each other as if neither had ever suffered any wounds. Gary believed he was beginning a new chapter of life, peaceful and safe. But in reality, he had unknowingly stepped into a labyrinth with no escape. Anthony often brought up powerful Hollywood figures, like director Otto Preminger or producer Hal Wallace. Whenever this happened, Gary would stay silent, unwilling to interfere with his lover's ambitions. However, he began to feel uneasy as more and more late-night parties appeared, and private meetings on Mulholland Drive took place without clear mutual agreement. Every time Gary refused to join, Anthony would just give a cold smile, disappear for the entire night, and return the next morning with vacant eyes and a faint scent of alcohol lingering on his collar. Worse still, Anthony started to drag Gary into subtle psychological manipulations, sending anonymous letters to journalist Luella Parsons, accusing a veteran star of suffering from mild psychosis and having violent tendencies when jealous, or forcing Gary to write handwritten letters that Anthony would then type himself, letters that Anthony accidentally left behind in Warner Brothers' dressing rooms. In early 1959, a series of forged letters, edited audio tapes, and even lost diary pages were anonymously sent to columnists such as Hedda Hopper, Jimmy Starr, and Motion Picture Herald. In these, Gary was portrayed as a controlling, domineering figure, obsessed with sexual attraction to young men. One excerpt that caused a stir at Variety read, "He was not only my best role, he is the reason I still exist. If he leaves me, I would rather die." Gary had never written these words, yet the punctuation, hyphenation, and typing style all bore his unmistakable mark. Anthony had copied it exactly. The climax came in March 1960, just weeks before Psycho premiered, when an anonymous journalist accused Gary of undergoing a serious psychological crisis and threatening suicide because he had been abandoned by a young co-star. Immediately, the producers of The Wreck of the Mary Dear removed his name from the fall casting list, and Paramount hesitated to renew his contract for another 5 years. One evening at Musso and Frank, Gary unexpectedly ran into Anthony. He asked only one question: "Do you really love me? Or has this all been one long, drawn-out scene from the start?" Anthony smiled, but said nothing. And in that moment, Gary realized that to kill a person, sometimes a gun is not necessary. All it takes is love, long enough and cold enough. 2. Carrie Grant, the domineering figure behind the scenes. Carrie Grant was like a double-edged sword, outwardly polished and charming, yet behind the curtain, cold and dangerous. Hollywood was captivated by his captivating eyes, enchanting smile, and the gentlemanly demeanor mixed with a touch of English romanticism. However, Gary Cooper loved him for reasons that most people had never seen. And that, in fact, was the greatest mistake of his life. At the end of 1937, the two met at a private film screening at director George Cukor's house in Beverly Hills. It wasn't their first time facing each other, but it was the first time they talked long enough to lose track of time. Carrie looked at Gary with a gaze that seemed to want control. Gary maintained his usual distance. Yet in that cramped room, with no one else watching, the wall of distance between them completely collapsed. Just 1 week later, they rented a small house together in Silver Lake, at the end of Hyperion Avenue, a place where paparazzi rarely dared to venture. The lease was under the name of Murray Winters, Carrie's personal secretary. But they remained two stars, living in two separate worlds. By night, behind closed curtains, they became two men truly in love, silently loving each other in secrecy. Veronica, Gary's wife, still stood by his side at public events. But she no longer cared where he went, when he came home, or why he often returned very late. In a private letter sent to her close friend Annabelle Knox in New York, now preserved at Columbia University's library, Veronica wrote, "Gary is still gentle, but he no longer belongs to me. I don't know who holds that gaze now, but it certainly isn't me." Their love lasted quietly for more than a year, until one fateful night in August 1939, when everything suddenly shattered. While Gary was filming The Westerner in Arizona, the Los Angeles Examiner unexpectedly published an exclusive front-page story. Gary Cooper having an affair with a mysterious male figure. Scandal rocks Paramount. The article included no photos and no names, but every detail matched chillingly. The La Quinta Hotel, the 1937 Packard, the house in Silver Lake, everything was accurate, down to the last period. Gary panicked that very night. He called Carrie seeking some comfort. But instead of reassurance, he only heard a cold voice. "I don't know what you're talking about. Do you think I'd destroy my career over something vague? If you want to fall, don't drag me down with you." A few weeks later, Carrie Grant appeared in an extended interview with Louella Parsons of the Hearst Syndicate, frankly stating, "I pity those who cannot control their private lives. As for me, I'm different. I always know the boundary between reality and performance." It wasn't until 1979 that Philip G. Ross, former editor of The Examiner, revealed in his memoir, Deadline Confidential, "We received an anonymous call from inside providing all the details about Cooper's relationship with an A-list actor in exchange for $12,000. I cannot disclose the identity, but he was once hailed as the #1 gentleman of the silver screen, originally from Bristol. After the scandal, Gary and Veronica's marriage nearly fell apart. Veronica left for New York for 3 months, leaving their daughter, Maria, in Los Angeles. Gary barely left the house. In a hastily written black ink letter that he never sent, he left these lines: "You didn't kill me with words, Carrie. You killed me with the silence afterward. I lost my family, lost my dignity, all because I believed you also believed this was real. But in the end, you were only acting." In the list he left in a trunk in Montana, Cooper did not write the name of that person. There was only one line: the betrayer, the first lover, the one who sold my soul for 3 lines of news. But Carrie was only the opening chapter. The next person on the list was truly Gary's hopeless love addiction. Someone who stayed, never left, but never dared to call what they had love. The closer this person was, the more distant they became. And in the end, it was Gary himself who had to sever the binding cord with his own hands. 3. Rock Hudson. The sweetest lover, but also the most subtle manipulator I've ever known. If Carrie Grant was the kind of man who could stab Gary Cooper right in broad daylight in front of all America, then Rock Hudson chose to poison his drink instead, smiling gently as he forced Gary to take sip after sip. They first met at the end of 1949 during a secret casting session at Universal Studios. At that time, Rock was barely in his 20s, had never had a significant role, lived off money his mother sent from Illinois, and was tied to a 6-month C-grade contract. But what caught Gary's attention wasn't talent, but something he had never seen in Carrie. Absolute adoration. "You're the reason I dared to set foot in Hollywood," Rock said on their very first meeting. "I even learned how to ride horses just because I wanted to play a cowboy like you." Gary later called that the line that killed me, because from that moment on, he began to protect Rock like a child, or more accurately, like a lover who would never grow up. It didn't take long before they moved in together into a rented house in West Hollywood, under the name of Gary's personal assistant. Rock lived there for almost 3 years, from 1950 until mid-1953. During that time, Rock Hudson became the only person who both made Gary Cooper fall passionately in love and planted deep doubts about himself. Gary once believed he was the one in control of their relationship. But in reality, Rock controlled him in ways so sweet they couldn't be called manipulation, and so gentle that Gary never had the courage to resist. In 1952, Rock began to refuse small roles. He openly said, "I can't keep playing cops in khaki pants. I want to be recognized like you." Blinded by love, Gary personally called director Henry Hathaway to recommend Rock for a role in Niagara. Although the part ultimately went to Joseph Cotten, Rock clearly understood. Gary would do anything to keep him around. In 1953, Rock Hudson landed his first leading role in Magnificent Obsession, a major turning point in his career. Yet before filming began, during a tipsy evening, he told Gary, "They want me to be squeaky clean. Clean in both image and relationships. If rumors get out, I'll lose everything before I even become famous. You understand that, don't you?" But things didn't stop there. To protect his own path, Rock quietly spread rumors that Gary Cooper suffered from mental disorders and was violent at home. At a Beverly Hills party in early 1954, half joking, half serious, he told journalist Hedda Hopper, "Gary has only 2 moods, either sitting still like a statue or raging and smashing things. I've even seen him throw a typewriter just because of one line he didn't like." Just 1 week later, Hollywood Reporter ran the headline, "Is the cowboy cracking? Sources say Cooper exhibits erratic behavior." Gary couldn't understand what was happening. Worse, he discovered that the dosage in the seconal sedative bottles at home had been altered. He once told his personal doctor, "I don't remember taking that much, but I started losing track of day and night." There was a rumor, originating from Rock's former secretary, that he often secretly slipped extra drugs into Gary's drinks to keep him by my side, calm and unquestioning. It was a love, both sweet and dangerously possessive, an absolutely controlling love. In November 1955, Rock suddenly married Phyllis Gates, his agent's secretary, in a carefully arranged wedding. Gary received no explanation whatsoever. A week later, Rock appeared on The Steve Allen Show and emotionally said, "I grew up poor and always dreamed of having a real family. I was lucky to find a woman who loves me for who I am, not for the image on the screen." The whole country was moved, but Gary understood all too well. That was just a performance, staged to erase his presence from Rock's life. If Rock Hudson made Gary lose his way and his self-trust, then the fourth man was completely different. In 1947, when Gary returned to the set of Unconquered, people noticed his eyes had changed. They were no longer clear as before. At that time, very few knew that after all of the months Gary had disappeared, the first person to call him was a man with a sad smile, who had twice nearly died mixing alcohol with sedatives, and who loved him like the last flicker of flame in a blazing desert. That man was Montgomery Clift. For Montgomery Clift, the irreparably broken mirror, Gary once quietly leaned toward his co-star, Joel McCrea, and whispered, "Monty loves with his whole body, but when he hates, he uses his mind, and I never know which side I'm on." They first met in the spring of 1951 at a private party hosted by director George Cukor. At that time, Gary was struggling to escape the overwhelming shadow of Carrie Grant, while Montgomery Clift had just been hailed by Life magazine as the most dangerous heir to Marlon Brando. From a distance, Monty saw Gary, his back straight, shoulders slightly relaxed, eyes as calm and deep as a still lake before the storm. He simply said one sentence and then stepped closer. "I know that look. It once lived in the mirror in my room." Just 2 weeks later, Gary left his apartment on Wilshire to move in with Monty in a secluded villa nestled among the pine forests of Big Sur, a place with no phone signal, no neighbors, and no escape route. Monty called it a healing retreat. Now, but for Gary, it was no different than a psychological laboratory, where his emotions were dissected to the core, no longer a whole person, but a fragmented entity. Monty demanded cutting off all contact with the outside world. He personally burned Gary's address book in the fireplace, unplugged the telephone wires, and instructed the housekeeper to accept orders only through signed notes from himself. In the evenings, they ate dinner in silence. Afterwards, Monty would turn on a 16 projector in the middle of the room, screening Gary's old films like Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, Sergeant York, The Westerner. Sitting behind, Monty whispered as if hypnotizing, "Tell me, do you love the man in that movie? Or are you just reenacting a dream that never really happened?" At first, it was a question. Then it became a demand, and finally, an order. When Gary resisted, Monty never shouted or smashed things. Instead, he played a recording, Gary's own voice speaking about loneliness, fear, and the desire to disappear. Monty had secretly hidden a recorder inside the old typewriter Gary carried. Gary's most private monologues had been violated. Whenever they argued, Monty made Gary kneel before the large mirror in the living room, a nearly 30-kilogram silver-framed mirror custom made in Italy, and read aloud every word of the sentence Monty had written. "Who am I, if I am not loved by someone like you?" One night, Gary tried to leave. He quietly packed his bags at 2 a.m., but when he opened his suitcase, a small device suddenly played Monty's pre-recorded voice, steady and rhythmic. "If you leave, every role you play afterward will be an empty shadow." Gary did not leave. He did not destroy the recorder either. He just stood silently in the darkness until dawn. 6 months in Big Sur passed like a slow dream, sliding down into an abyss. When William Holden, his close friend, finally found him and brought Gary back to Los Angeles, he had lost over 11 kilograms, his eye sockets deeply sunken. Throughout the entire journey from Big Sur to Hollywood, Gary spoke only one sentence: "I no longer know who is living in me or who I am living inside." Monty denied everything. In an interview with Modern Screen magazine, he only gave a vague smile. "Sometimes people confuse love with possession, but I never was like that." In the notebook Monty left behind, there was a single page written in red ink: "I once loved a mirror, but I accidentally threw it to the ground." And that mirror, though shattered, once reflected the truest essence Gary Cooper possessed. But fate was not yet done. When Gary tried to start over, to distance himself from those who had broken him, Hollywood brought forth a new face, radiant, brilliant, but in its eyes, still hiding something unpredictable. 5. Randolph Scott, the silent rival, behind the mask of the perfect lover. The next person on the list is none other than Randolph Scott. At first glance, Randolph was the ideal model of a Hollywood gentleman. Tall stature, elegant demeanor, calm voice, always appearing in a neatly ironed white shirt with a restrained smile. Yet behind that quiet exterior lurked a chilling habit: collecting people just as he collected scripts, systematically, meticulously, and without leaving any trace. Their first meeting was in 1940 during the casting for They Died with Their Boots On at Warner Brothers, and to the end, both were rejected. But just as Gary stepped out of the casting room, Randolph unexpectedly turned back and delivered a sarcastic remark: "We're better off losing together than winning alone." Gary laughed. Perhaps it was that very sentence that stirred something in him for the man who was at once so much like him, yet completely different. Randolph was unlike anyone Gary had ever encountered, neither loud nor imposing, never interrogative, at least, not in the beginning. Only 3 months later, Gary moved in with Randolph at a secluded mansion in Silver Lake, Los Angeles. Those early days felt like a dream, shielded from the intrusive spotlight of the press. They cooked together, played tennis, read scripts, and wrote imaginary dialogues never meant to be used. But the last peaceful night ended the moment Gary jolted awake at 3 a.m. to the sound of rattling coming from the wardrobe. It wasn't a rat. It was the noise of a running tape recorder. From that moment on, everything began to change. Randolph seemed to know too much, even things Gary had never spoken aloud. Like the time Gary sat alone on the steps, tapping out some idle lines on a royal typewriter Randolph had gifted him. I wish he knew pain like I do. Later, Gary realized the typewriter had been fitted with a tracking device and used special carbon paper so that every line he typed produced a copy. Every word, every period, every doubt was recorded, like a complete script waiting to be performed. In 1944, Randolph released the film Under the Floorboards, a dark, psychological drama about a young actor living in illusion, loving a powerful man, and ultimately self-destructing because he could no longer distinguish true love from manipulation. The film won the Golden Globe for Best Original Screenplay. But the one silently watching in a private room, quietly rolling up his sleeve to hide his trembling, was the real-life inspiration behind the story, Gary Cooper. Every line of dialogue, every letter, every private memory had been brought to the screen without permission. No thanks given, no mention of his name. And when the main character knelt down in the room, looked up at his lover, and said, "If I'm wrong, please rewrite me as a different line," Gary stood up and left the theater. He never spoke of it again. Afterwards, Gary disappeared from Los Angeles for a long time. 6. Tab. Hunter. The Sweet Trap. Amidst the cold winter. If there was ever someone who made Gary Cooper believe he could love once more, a complete love, without hesitation, without guarding himself, it was Tab Hunter, the young actor with clear, bright eyes and a smile that concealed hidden scars. They happened to meet again in February 1957, backstage at the premiere of Love Me Tender. Before that, they had briefly crossed paths at a small party hosted by Universal. But that day, when the gaze of the 25-year-old young man met the man long accustomed to silence, everything changed. Neither of them left that place with the same feelings as before. I once thought, if there was anyone who could teach me how to exist in this world without feeling ashamed of myself, it would be you, Tab quietly said one chilly afternoon at Griffith Park as they rode horses along the hillside together. Gary did not reply immediately, but from that moment on, he began sending Tab handwritten letters praising his role in The Steel Lady, introduced him to director Henry Levin, and quietly shielded him from rumors about his sexuality, rumors that could have destroyed an entire career after just one party. Their love grew gradually, silently, like a small cut unnoticed by anyone except Veronica. She never asked questions. She simply chose to sleep separately. From June 1957, Gary often left the house on Thursday evenings, saying he was writing a script at a rented house in Manhattan Beach. In truth, that place was their secret rendezvous, where Tab would always arrive early, turn on a soft yellow light, and leave a handwritten note. "I don't need anything. I just want to see that you no longer have to play Cooper." But Tab's love was not like a mature love. It was innocent, impulsive, always tinged with the fear of abandonment. Once, just because he saw Gary accidentally touch Van Heflin's shoulder during a script reading, he called him dozens of times. Another time, he slipped into Cooper's car's trunk a hastily written letter in red ink. If one day you disappear without a word, then I will also disappear from your life, but in a way that will make you remember me forever. Gary did not get angry. He only felt sadness because, more than anyone, he understood. Tab did not love him as a man loves a man, but loved as if holding on to a dream that needed a place to exist. Then one day, in November 1957, Gary returned to the seaside house as usual. But the lights were off, the familiar note was gone, and the kitchen had long since gone cold. 3 days later, the front page of Photoplay announced, "Tab Hunter, engaged to actress Linda Peterson. The screen icon finds happiness." No one asked about Gary, nor did anyone mention the quiet Thursday nights. Gary remained silent, only staring at the headline, folding the newspaper, and putting it into a drawer he would never open again. On the dining table, Veronica left only one line. "If I am not the last to know about this, then at least I will be the first to end it." Gary did not argue. He left Los Angeles for 3 months. Only director George Stevens once recounted that on a winter night, he saw Gary sitting alone in the garden behind the Bel Air Hotel, wearing sunglasses, holding a folded, yellowed piece of paper. No one knows what was written inside. The only certainty is that after that night, Gary Cooper never mentioned Tab Hunter's name again. 7. James Dean, a love story that ended in a mysterious accident. In 1953, Gary Cooper entered the loneliest period of his life. His marriage to his wife existed only in name. His career had stalled. Former lovers either betrayed him or took advantage of him. And then, James Dean appeared. They did not meet in Hollywood, but happened to cross paths at a small cafe on McDougal Street in Greenwich Village, New York. At that time, Dean was rehearsing for a play by Elia Kazan, while Gary dropped by to attend a gathering of a film friends group from the 1930s. Dean wasn't invited. He came purely out of curiosity. But when Gary's gaze fell on him, Dean only gave a slight smile and said, "I never expected my idol in real life to be so sad." Gary remained silent. Yet throughout that entire evening, his eyes never left the 23-year-old young man sitting in the corner of the cafe, sipping black coffee without sugar and doodling a few strokes on a napkin. Just 1 week later, they began meeting regularly. At first, they took walks in Central Park, which gradually turned into aimless night drives. Dean held the steering wheel, while Gary leaned his head against the window frame, letting the wind tousle his hair and feeling a relief he had never known before. James Dean was completely different from everyone else. He didn't care for fame, nor did he need anyone to protect him. The only thing he wanted was Gary's presence in every little moment. And Gary, who had lived his entire life in perfectly scripted roles, suddenly felt like a young man just stepping into his 20s when he was with him. At the end of August 1955, while they stayed near the Joshua Tree Desert, Dean whispered softly in Gary's ear, "If I come out publicly, would you be afraid?" Gary was silent for a long time before replying, "I'm only afraid that I won't be brave enough to go all the way with you." And they had planned a secret interview with journalist Lyle Curtin, who had once refused millions of dollars just to keep Rock Hudson's secret, to take place on October 10th, 1955, in a discreet apartment in Burbank. The topic would be a sincere account of a love without a name. But that day never came. On September 30th, 1955, James Dean died in a crash on Route 466 while driving his Porsche 550 Spider to Salinas. The tragic news spread like a bolt from the blue. The accident was officially concluded as a high-speed collision. However, many years later, in a drunken confession, the chief engineer of Little Bastard, the company that maintained the car, revealed that Porsche never had new brakes installed. The person who ordered the repair even insisted it was unnecessary. Signed, someone from Gary Cooper's circle. No one ever verified this. Afterward, Gary disappeared from the public eye for nearly a year. People saw him only once at St. Ignatius Church in San Francisco, exactly on Dean's birthday the following year. He wore a black hat and stood for a long time in front of the statue of St. John. In 1973, when Gary Cooper passed away, people found a wooden box inside his private home in Montana. Inside was an old audio tape. On the tape, Dean's voice trembled lightly as he slowly said, "If one day everything disappears, please don't remember me as a star. Remember me as the child who once wanted you to love, without fear of anything." And from then on, Gary never loved anyone else. The chest had been opened. Yet perhaps the deepest sorrow did not lie in those 7 other names, but in the silence left behind after it all. Do you think Gary Cooper was ever truly loved? Or was he merely a shadow, substituting for desires never spoken aloud? Did he place his feelings in the wrong person? Or simply, was he never taught how to feel a true kind of love all his life? If what you have just heard made you pause for a few seconds and suddenly doubt the truth behind the golden age of Hollywood's glamour, please leave a comment below to share with us. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any future videos.